Well, hello, everybody. Welcome back to this podcast series, Talking Leadership and Best Practice Network. This is part of our ongoing series where we're looking to explore different topics that happen around from our member discussions and key topics as we engage with industry. I'd like to welcome back Eric. How are you, mate?
Good, mate. Thank you for having me.
Good. And David Greaves, great to have you here. And I know we're in sunny Queensland at the moment.
It is fairly sunny. I'm happy to gloat.
And David Stewart, welcome back. Great to have you. You've spoken before at some of our business leaders forums, but great to have you as part of this podcast series.
Thanks, Kevin, and a pleasure to be here in such an esteemed company.
Part of the topic that we've got that we really want to explore today is all this around about navigating uncertainty. And I'm really going to ask David Stewart just to give us a bit of background and kick us off on really around, especially around inflection points, which is our first discussion point. And then once David's had a chance to really explore some of those key themes, we're going to open up and have a good group discussion from there. So David, do you want to start us off today?
Look, I'll start this off with just some themes and observations to kickstart the conversation, but it's clear the world is at an inflection point, and indeed the world has been shaped by inflection points. And just by way of sort of definition, an inflection point is caused by an event that results in significant change, most of which is unforeseen and unpredictable. So hence the need for navigating uncertainty. If I gave some sort of recent examples of inflection points and some of the themes that when you look back on it, your history then starts to give you a good sense of what an inflection point is and the impact. So if you think after World War II, that heralded the creation of modern management theory as Peter Drucker and used that to rebuild Japan. And so some of the great brands in Sanyo, Toyota, all coming out of there using the principles of modern management theory. You've also then saw the impact of TV, the birth of the baby boomers, and the pursuit of a quest for better living. So appliances and home devices to improve the livability of living at home. And then you move into the recession of the late 80s and early 90s, and that saw in the rise of digitization and obviously the introduction of the World Wide Web and personal computers. And that sort of then starts to bring in the new brands that dominate our world today: Apple, Facebook, Microsoft, Google, and all the way that we transact and communicate with each other. And you also then saw the death of the slow-moving brands like Kodak, Nokia, who couldn't keep up with the changes that were rapidly taking place. And then more recently, if you look at the global financial crisis and the heralding the rise of the disruptors. So eBay, Amazon, Uber, Airbnb, Netflix, all targeting slow-moving, cumbersome supply chains that they could disrupt and impact, leading to the rise of digital apps and the phone going from a phone to a computer in your pocket and a personal device, and the rise of retailers that are online. And so the aggregators and Amazon and the big aggregators of retail. So fundamentally changing in-store shopping experiences. So they're just examples of how inflection points can impact in business. And I'm sure others will have great examples of different sectors going into that. But there's some things for leaders to actually start to think about if it just is part of this scene set. And you're seeing already the rise of the Great Reset. And for those unaware, the World Economic Forum is leading an agenda called the Great Reset that they're targeting in Davos next year, but it's on three key themes: sustainability. So the environment sustainability is coming in as something that circular economy thinking, carbon neutral, carbon zero, all those thinking is going to be something that all businesses and supply chains need to be aware of. The second pillar they're looking at under the Great Reset is fairness. So the notion of fairness of trade, fairness of use and things like, and B Corps and the paying of good wages and working with that. And the third thing they're looking at is the wealth distribution coming particularly out of the vaccination of the world and how far behind poorer countries are suffering from the vaccination rollout compared to the wealthier countries. And so they're the three principles. So there's a great reset happening. Within that great reset is also businesses are needing to rethink their supply chains and their sourcing. So that's another thing that they need to think about. And finally, just as part of some of the predictions and early trends is flexibility and hybrid working, how people want to work and where they want to choose to live, and the rise of part-time rather than full-time work or where I want to work or how I want to work. So in terms of just our discussion today, the key messages for leaders is that it's a bit like, as you described, Kevin, preparing a crew to go out sailing. You need to prepare for all sorts of weather conditions, keep an eye on the environment and changing weather patterns. But you kind of don't know what's moving, what's going to be, what the new normal is going to be. It's going to need to be able to something that we need to navigate. And this is where, for leaders, I pick up the three A's that you need to think about. Part of this is how do you align your thinking and your teams with the changing circumstances that we're moving in for? How do you actually then start to give your skills and the teams to adapt to the changing circumstances, and how do you empower adaptability? And the third thing is keeping agility to the market forces, and so early warning trends and scenarios as they start to play out. How do you agilely navigate those as being some of what I call the 3 A's of need to think for leaders, and how you empower and build your capability around all those things. So for me, as a scene set, that kind of then puts together some pretty meaty topics for leaders to start thinking about, both within their market, within their business, and within their teams and cultures.
Thank you, David. And I think definitely around the 3 A's, I'm hearing a lot around that message about the, as we're in these uncertain times and continue to be uncertain, and the way things are changing, the whole ability to be agile, to be able to adapt, and then almost align and bring it. What does that really mean? Is that constant cycle, which for a lot of industries is almost daily, hourly. For some, it's obviously less frequent now. Been doing that on a consistent basis around the ongoing pressures and disruptions, and who knows what that next disruption will be as well, which is we can predict it off from there. So David Greaves, come back to you from a Dawala group, because you've got a pretty extensive history in work you've done before, but what's some of those key disruptors you've seen within Dawala group, and how does that align with the way you think the leadership is working now compared to 5 years ago?
The big disruptor for us, I think the inflection point for us is sustainability. Because all the big companies now are pushing sustainability through their supply chain. So, you're compelled to, our biggest customer is Coles, for example. We're compelled to align with Coles on their whichever UN sustainability goals they adapt, and then we add to that. So we're doing a lot of work on that, and we're sort of liaising with the other 2 companies in the group. And I think that's, the thing that frightens me about that is not, I find it really exciting, but I think the thing that worries me about it is, the ability of, when you've got these traditional type companies who, in the technology and system space are fairly adaptable, to then take on the change that's required to adapt to climate change and to become a more sustainable supply chain is beyond a lot of them. We're a traditional industry, really. We just grow chickens and we do it very well. And, it has become a lot better. But this is a new type of challenge, I think. And it really means acknowledging that the landscape is going to change. The requirement of us is going to change. Fortunately, chicken is probably the most environmentally friendly sources of protein, but still is going to be a lot of emphasis on, us looking carefully at our supply chain and adapting. And it's also acknowledging too that we're a business that the kilos per head of population just incrementally grows every year on year, and people take that for granted. Whereas I think with plant-based and lab-grown meats, we are going to see possibly a decline in that graph, and that's something we need to adapt to, either by getting involved in that side of it or really pushing our environmental credentials. I talk to people all the time, and I'm pretty sure they're sick of me, but about, particularly people my age, they don't understand that younger people in particular, but even middle-aged people, are now making their eating decisions on environmental concerns, on their health concerns. So, it's all values-based now. Before it used to be, what tastes good. Now it's a lot of those decisions are based on their values. So we've got to learn to acknowledge that and react to it. In terms of dealing with it, I think Dawala's done a lot of work in the last 5 to 10 years, and it's all based around something I heard somebody say at a conference once, that, Toyota are working 40 years into their 10,000-year or 1,000-year plan, and that just impressed me. And when you look into it, it's all about, if you just train your people, if you have a real good attitude towards systems and technology, you build those foundational practices that everybody just accepts, I mean, you can really adapt to anything. You can adapt to new business. You can adapt to the change. I think the companies that haven't really developed their people and their teams and their systems to adapt, I think they're the ones that are going to really struggle.
And I think that's a very relevant point. We're coming back to those 3 A's and being willing to rethink and think out of the box, even when things are going really, really well, in terms of, and those disruptors and the way they come through. So, Eric, has there been any key points from your recent discussions around this whole uncertainty and especially around those 3 A's?
Definitely around the uncertainty has come up. I work in the seafood sector, so I might challenge David on the climate credentials of seafood, which I think trump most other protein sources, but we won't get into those arguments here because that's not what we're here to talk about. But I think, of course, and I love your product, so I'm not going to have that argument, mate. I'll let you have the win. I think uncertainty is pervasive across some of the sectors that I'm familiar with, and in the seafood sector, it's not an uncertainty leading to potential destabilization. It's more rethinking what do current supply chains look like and can we do something different from the different points in that supply chain. So an example of that is we have more and more commercial fishers in the catching part of the sector. So you've got sectors really divided into 2 big camps, those that catch or grow the seafood and those in the post-harvest sector that are selling it to the public as either a retailer or a wholesaler and everything in between. And that's a very crude and simple analysis there of the supply chain. But from the catching sector perspective, what COVID brought in as a disruption to that, the thinking there is, well, why can't we sell if we're catching the product direct to public rather than go through an intermediary to sell the product, which would mean more dollars per kilo for the catcher rather than losing some of that profit to selling direct to a wholesaler. Now, not everyone has taken up that challenge because one of the assumptions I had, and it was shot very much out of the water, is some people just want to harvest the product, sell it, and then be done with it. They don't want to have a public interface. And so understanding what your business capabilities are going to be a real necessity going forward for those that are leading organizations, and what you assumed worked before a shock has come through may not work into the future. Now that's easy to say, but when you're relying on your bottom line to survive, you're going to have some uncomfortable conversations with others and some self-reflection around what it'll mean for your business. And probably the last thing to say here, and something that I've been mulling over in my head for a little while, and I like the 3 A's concept about aligning, being agile and adaptable, is that maybe into the future, what we're going to see with leadership is that's not just pervasive of leaders, it's of every employee in the organization. So you're training to get people to think more, aligning what they do with the business goals, being more agile in what they do and being more adaptable. Those skills are really essential in leaders, but I think they're essential across all employees. So are we looking at potentially navigating uncertainties in the future with organizations that have got leadership at all levels that are prepared to adapt up and down depending on what is required in the environment? Now, I'm looking long term, but that's where I think some of this is heading. So a lot more to unpack there. And I'm not for a second suggesting that everyone has the capability or the capacity or the dollars to make any of this happen very quickly. But if we're not having these conversations, we'll just revert to type. And by that, I mean, we'll just keep doing what we've done before and hope that we get a different outcome down the track, which I don't think is a good way to be. So yeah, that's probably my contribution to that point, mate.
We're picking out some key points here we talked about flexibility, ways of working, the way the supply chain. I think it's also getting over the challenge. You can still add great value here, in terms of really understanding what your value is. And I was just picking up on some feedback locally where they've been talking to a lot of just restaurants and social outlets recently who in their mind, just saw them as a restaurant. People turn up, sit down, have a meal and go out. And they've really adapted to the whole, adapting over to like the takeaway, which has now become such a core part of what they do. They've become very good at it. They're almost challenging some of the traditional takeaway areas now in terms of, because people like what they do and go through it, but just their staff just being able to react to that. And I think there's a great point you mentioned here in terms of I think the value can come right through the whole business now. I think there's a whole, I hear something, I see something, I've got to have that confidence and that ability to actually then make a decision or feed that decision up and not just wait for that senior person to sit there with the hand on the rudder and go, this is where we're going, team. I've made the decision because I've been here for 20 years and I've got the title. And I suppose that could be one of the challenges for senior leaders now is how do you keep control of go back to the analogy, the sailboat, but allow my crew to take control of how we do it and where we go. So I think, David, we've spoken about a little bit before. Now, hi, Rakhil, can you hear us?
Hi, Kevin. Sorry, my internet conked out here in Dubai and Hotel, so I'm actually at a Starbucks around the corner.
Oh, well, Rakhil, if it makes you feel any better, we were just going to start recording and my internet dropped out as well completely. So we've got Eric Perez here, who's been running podcasts for a while and is now co-hosting with me. We've got David Stewart from Reaching Your Pinnacle, who has given us some key starting points here. David Greaves from Darwalla Group, has been an active member of the network, and your team would have met some of his team as well on some of their trips over here. And then Rakhil, you are, like you say, and I've just had the warning message on my phone saying my internet is down. There you go. Was that 25 minutes too late? And Rakhil, great to have you. So Rakhil, we were just having our discussion around inflection points and disruption, and some of the key things that David was really talking about was some of the leadership things that are now coming around about the 3 A's. All about alignment, adaptability, and agility, and also some of the rethinks that are going around supply chains and how your supply chains work, flexibility, and the different ways of working, which I know you would have seen across your multi-sites, multi-country, multi-business. So I think what I'll do, if you just want to, I'm sure you got your coffee there, just have a listen in the conversation and I'll bring you in just a couple of minutes.
Terrific.
Can we just explore this flexibility ways of working and the impact? David Greaves, can I just come back to you here because you're dealing regionally. You know, you've got remote farms, you've got remote locations. What's the disruption been and what's the changes you've seen on the way that you engage and your teams work over the past 12 months?
Oh, look, I think probably the biggest disruption has been particularly me, we used to travel out west quite often at the end of batches, during batches, just have a presence because where those guys are locked down due to biosecurity reasons, but also just the geographic location, and they can just get forgotten. So we've had to really put a stop to that. You know, unless you've got a really good reason to go and visit a farm, you don't go and visit a farm. And I think that's had an impact. You know, when I started here 12 years ago, nobody visited the farms. The farms were just in isolation. They didn't know anybody. So we had a scheme where everybody visited every location, and that worked wonders. I think the other thing, in terms of, there was a little bit of, you had the old school, like, oh, will people really work from home and things like that. But we overcame that very quickly, and we just adapted to that. I think just the really, really tight control on access to all of our remote properties is probably the biggest impact on us. Mm. But having said that, Kevin, I'll go back to something you said about, how do you let go of control and things like that. We've had a team-based culture for a long time now, and we're confident that on all of those sites, they own that business. Ownership's one of our values, and they know they own it. They know what the plan is. They know how it fits with the overall strategy. They know what's expected. And so having the conversations online is pretty easy because everybody is on the same page. And, we have a daily team meeting, for example, which starts at the lowest level early in the morning before most of us are awake. And then it just goes up the levels until, 8:30 every morning, the team has their meeting. So we know, everybody in the organisation knows what the issues are every day. So that's been a great success as well.
No, thank you, David, and I appreciate we've known each other for a while now, and I know that whole team and ownership around the group has been a real strong part of the business. And I think we've got a firm learning from our network, from a leadership point of view, is the companies that have embedded some great principles and great leadership and great culture over a period of time are definitely living off that, and in some cases thriving off that as well. You can't just suddenly switch the button when I have to and go, I'm a great leader, let's have a great culture and go and solve. So Rakhil, can I come back to you here? And it is great to catch up with you and see you again. It has been a while. Now, you talk about in your notes, so you may just want to give just a brief update on the business and the size, but you've had this, what we call the whipsaw effect. You've had to deal with this uncertainty of you being shut down, but your market open, and then you opening up and then your market shutting down. So how's that just impacted the way the leadership, but also how you've engaged with your teams?
Well, I think it's, we've been filled with uncertainty. Thanks a lot, Kevin, for having me online as always. I'm Rakhil Hirdaramani. I'm a director at the Hirdaramani Group, an apparel manufacturer based out of Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Vietnam, and Ethiopia. And, we've had a major whipsaw effect, as you touched on. So going back to March of 2020, we shut down for 6 weeks straight, and we employ over 50,000 associates. So for us in Asia, the world essentially came to a standstill because, much like yourselves in Australia, it was a zero tolerance curfew as a lockdown, right? We weren't allowed to walk around or go into supermarkets. It was an interesting impact. And all of us know that in manufacturing, the minute you stop, it just comes to a complete standstill, whether it be cash flow or associates. And a lot of our associates are paid on incentives. So we took the decision to make sure that all our work staff were paid in full for time not worked. That was the first step. But when our customers came to a standstill, they started mass cancellations, citing force majeure. And what we had to do was pivot very, very quickly. So what did we do? We couldn't get approval for PPE from the FDA or from medical associations. So we started manufacturing locally for our government's medical needs. We then moved into face covers, and we started offering them to our customers, saying, hey, you guys will need them in the US or in Australia or even in Hong Kong, or your associates in whatever fields you're in. So it took a lot of creativity to kick off with. And the next step was obviously to start looking at slightly longer lead times, because China was shut down. A lot of our material, about 60%, comes from there. And it made us realize how dependent we are on our logistics and supply chain. So it's a great disconnect right now, right, Kevin? Sea and air freights to the US, which used to cost $1.50 per kilo, are now $8 a kilo. No one can afford that in the retail game.
So, and I think it's a really interesting point you pick up from this leadership point of view is I think we're back to where you've got those open eyes. And I think this is this uncertainty bit of being really aware of what your market is, what your supply chain is, what your business is we always knew it was important, but it's almost been critical now because you're being asked to make some very quick decisions on what could be poor knowledge, especially if you're at the top and you haven't got that coming through. And I think, coming back to David's point around this whole of this reset, I'm really hearing from a lot of businesses at the minute is they've really had to reset their whole thinking about where their value add is in their business, where their critical points are in their business. And that's really opened up how they manage those parts of the business as well. And then exposed a whole number of leadership questions, in terms of how have we been driving it in the right way? Have we been leading it in the right way as well? So where are our key points, but also that ability to almost take it as not a negative, but as to turn it around and say, now what can I do with it? And I think your pivot point of, well, we know what we're good at. We can make apparel, we can make garments, we can make this, and we do a damn good job at it. Instead of just looking backwards, how can I make use of it? Now, David Stewart, I think that's a really interesting point about in terms of thinking in this uncertainty bit. It's very easy to get that knock back and go, the woe is me, I can't do anything. That ability to be positive in that type of mindset in certain times, is that something that's coming out in that messaging and the way leaders having to think, or even may struggle to think?
I think this is a really key point, because having the right mindset is linked to alignment. And so the first thing, no matter where you are in the world, COVID's affected you in some way, shape or form. So my world has shrunk to it's affecting me. And then as we start to come out of the fog of COVID, how do we reset ourselves to take the next stepping stones on what growth might be? And having a growth mindset is mission critical to not only having a growth mindset in the business and where you are in the business cycle and what your markets are doing, but also as a personal thing in terms of having a growth mindset. And so when you start driving a growth mindset, one of the key capabilities that you're wanting your people to say, okay, do I want you to be going down a notion of being a compliant mindset, or do I need you to drive a competence mindset? And as you start to go down this competence, it's saying, okay, so how do I ask you to solve complex problems, or how do I ask you to actually act on and resort and deal with issues before they get away? How do I get you to innovate and problem solve things as we go through to improve performance? And how do I get you to coach and influence people? And so for me, this growth mindset, and I love the principle of the Oz principle, that you have above and below the line thinking, and the context around what is above the line thinking in your neck of the woods. What does that actually mean? Because we all fall below the line when things get tough or when things don't go our way, and that's human nature. We're hardwired to protect ourselves, and so how do you help dust yourselves off and pick yourselves up again? But more importantly, link your above the line thinking to how we run the business, how we grow the business, how we actually serve and manage our customers and suppliers, how we actually drive efficiencies, how we actually sort of support and coach and provide some seamless service and support with my colleague. And that's this alignment piece to say, okay, to move forward, you're going to have to build your business around networked teams. And networked teams goes with familiarity. And networked teams goes into the theme of alignment and familiarity and this, what I call above the line thinking. So do I go into below the line thinking, poor bugger me syndrome, or do I move into how to actually turn, lemon into lemonade in this particular circumstance and work with the team around that? And that then feels alignment first, agility second, and then adaptability third.
Just listening to you there in terms of the network teams, it just prompted something we were talking about the other day with a number of, and I think this is where this inflection point of having to work remotely, of having to suddenly, I haven't got that luxury of being in the office or of being able to quickly go and see someone. It's really exposed that whole, how do we get our teams to work together? Rakhil will be working with different time zones, different countries. Guys, we know difficulties in Australia. Now we've got 5 time zones in the same country, and that can cause chaos. So the idea of that network teams and then being able to get them to come together, the familiarity again is we still put teams in positions and we expect them to do miracles when they may not have worked together before, they may not know each other, and they may not understand where each other is from, is something which has really exposed a number of groups that we've been talking to, and they're on this rapid catch up again. So David Greaves, can I come back to you? So when that point of COVID kicked in, how did you and the team work? What was the thinking, and how much did you draw on what you'd done before, and how much did you have to rethink the way you were doing business?
I was in New Zealand at the time, believe it or not, and I was impressed. I was quite proud actually because we do have strong teams and good leaders for each of those teams. And, the senior leadership team was ringing me and we were having these confabs about what we do and all this. But, within a couple of days, we were giving instructions to the people on the sites as to how to keep people safe. And we discovered that they'd already done most of it themselves. They knew what was going on. They took the precautions, which is pretty critical in some of the areas. And then we just overlaid that with providing the information they needed and the materials they need and that. And it's been a hard, I think the fact that it's gone on for so long, there's a bit of fatigue starts to come in. People are just over it. And so constantly refreshing the message and just doing things like we've got 160 people. We put together sample bags for them or gift bags for them and deliver those just to thank them for staying safe and things like that. So you got to keep sort of promoting that message that, they're doing a great job. I've got to say too, I mean, it's from a business and a growth perspective, it's been probably one of our busiest periods in the company's history at the same time as all of this is going on. So you've had to cope with we built a lot of things. And so, you've got people coming from interstate to commission machines and build sheds and things like that. So they've had to deal with all that as well.
Yeah. And I love the point about which is that, there's masses of opportunities that have come out of these last 12, 18 months. For me, it's in this uncertainty, it's this ability to be able to see it and realize it and take that opportunity, which is key from there. And I think, the whole, I do agree with you on the whole, we will hear about the change fatigue, but we've had no choice. Literally, there's been no choice in the last 12 to 18 months, and the next 12 to 18 months is going to continue to drive that. So we are back to the question then, when we know everything we've gone through and we've got busy businesses and busy people, I suppose we're back to this theme here, Dave, which is about how do we navigate it now? Because that pace of change isn't going to happen. Now, I know, Rakhil, you do a lot with technology, but, some crazy stats that say in the last 12 months, we've had 10 years of technology change, and there's going to be another 10 years coming in the next 12 months. So, 20 years of change in 2 years. And someone said to me today, watch it next year because it's going to go even quicker. So things we're doing now, almost we never even thought of.
One of the good things that have come out of this for us is that it's sort of validated our proposition that, if you do set up a good team culture and you do, give them ownership, that it will provide a benefit in the long run. So it sort of validated that, but it's also stress tested it as well. So, they have been put under pressure. And like one of the things we identified is just the way we communicate. It's a bit ad hoc and inconsistent. So we work on that. The big looming threat to us, and I think that this COVID is basically a distraction to it, is climate change and the sustainability push. And if anything, it's like your pre-season game, because the real game is going to be sustainability and climate change, particularly in the food industry. So for me, this is just your warm-up match before the season starts.
Yep. Rakhil, I see you got your hand up.
Yeah, Kevin. I think you touched on it, right? Necessity is a pretty motivating factor for to drive change. And I think when you don't have a choice, you're really pushed into it. But I threw it in the chat as well. I love the idea of, our associates playing the role of entrepreneurs and working on the business. And you've met our team, and they always try to come in with new concepts and new ideas. But one concept that really shocked us when you spoke about the rate of change is how many unnecessary processes we've actually thrown into our business under the guise of compliance or process optimization. In some cases, we've done it just to keep people gainfully employed. It really made us realize that when we were on lockdown and we had limited access to our facilities, how few people we actually needed that weren't actually touching a physical garment in the manufacturer. And that's where it's not really process. It's just looking at what we're doing from a day-to-day operation, and are we doing it 8 hours a day? That was a big aha moment, because I think in our business, we've done a value stream map where we have 1,800 processes from receiving an order to shipping it out of the factory. And we reckon we could pull a third of those and make them redundant.
Through this period of either voluntarily stepping back or having to step back and thinking the whole, I always remember a very, very coach from many, many years ago who used to say to me, come on, let's go for a cup of coffee. Otherwise, you've got one phone call, 5 questions, and you're going to base, the next 12 months on those 5 questions. What would those 5 questions be? And it was always an interesting one about, so what are the 5 things do I really need to know or really need to understand to make that decision on? And it was really interesting how a lot of people go, well, actually, I'm not sure what I want to ask. Can I have 6? No. You've got to have 5. And I think that ability to I keep coming back to those words is to be adapt and be agile and come back and go, where is the real value at? Who needs to be in and who doesn't need to be in? And not that they're busy, but where is those key value points? And I think one of the other things I've really picked up, and I'll come to Eric there, is really understanding what is critical in actually those key processes. Because a lot of companies had to make a choice. Who do I have on site? Who do I not have on site? Now, I would imagine, and I'd be interested what your thoughts might be here, is if we'd asked that question 5 years ago, a high percentage of that would have been, I need my managers, I need my supervisors, I need to be there because I've got to make it happen because this person does this and this person does that. I reckon the whole thing would have flipped.
Absolutely. And, technology doesn't mature at the speed or a company's adoption of technology doesn't mature at the speed of the change we've experienced, right? So how did we get approvals done? We actually use smartphones when we couldn't have our quality manager at each of our sites simply because of COVID space restrictions. We'd have one team member take a photo, stick it on WhatsApp, send it to him and say, good or not. And there's simple, frugal steps that you could take that don't cost a fortune. And I think that's what I alluded to with the idea of having entrepreneurs in our business, because you have to keep thinking about how can I evolve? Yeah.
And I think going back to the way we do things, I'll come back to what David was saying earlier, this real challenge about way we do things. The natural thing would have been, I'm a manager, I've got to be there, I've got to pick it up, I've got to fly there, I've got to be there. It's been flipped. And that is going to be quite challenging to a lot of leaders and people in certain roles, because it's actually, maybe you're not as important as what you thought you were. And therefore you don't need to be making that decision. Eric, I see you got your hand up.
Really interested in something Rakhil said about baselining and looking at your processes and what can you change and what's been built up in the business as almost like your own creation of red tape and just padding in the business. Now, flip that to the leadership discussion around baselines, one thing that I hope businesses are doing, but because through this change, people are struggling to survive in some sectors, that what was our baseline of effective leadership before COVID? How did it morph through COVID? And what do we think is going to be better leadership into the future? I think it's a more difficult question to ask, but I think it's something we don't do well, I think, across sectors, is until we get a point where we have to pivot. And hopefully this has brought some lessons to bear about, do we know what our baselines are, whether it's in a production line, whether it's in the supply chain, or whether it's in how we develop our people? What did we have before? What did it look like, and how did we develop it? And bang, the change comes. How do we assess what we need now, and what do we need to do differently? And being able to align thinking, be agile and be adaptable suggests that you need to start from a baseline or a base somewhere. And I don't think just guessing at that, what that looks like is going to cut it anymore into the future, irrespective of industry. You may not agree, and I hope some of you don't, because I'd love to be challenged on this, but I think businesses have made a lot of assumptions, and if you don't deal with those assumptions, it'll come back to bite you later.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point that both Rakhil and Eric have made. And part of this is going into. I was talking with an owner of a large Australian manufacturing business yesterday, and he what they've done, their 400 staff have all gone to 4 days a week just to get through their COVID together. So entire staff all gone to 4 days a week, and he was making the observation that manufacturing has not dropped one iota. So they've still produced the same volume. And so it started a conversation that you were raising, Eric, around measuring what matters. So rather than actually going through to say we were producing at this level and therefore, how do we improve that? Coming back and challenging the status quo and actually starting to do a refresh, renew and reimagining. What is it that matters? So how do I measure what matters and start to look at that baselining and benchmarking to say in the new world order, what are the measures that matter? And therefore, how does that then inform the decision-making that I want my frontline leaders to be doing day in, day out as we navigate the new normal, whatever that is. And so I think that there's a really critical piece coming back and having a really strong critical review around measuring what matters. And as David has highlighted, we're going to have to be able to measure and demonstrate our from a community perspective, our scope 1, 2, and 3 carbon emissions. It's going to form part of those things. So how do you actually tell your story and reboot your story of who you are and what you do and how you're going to make a difference in the organisation that you work in? And the starting point is being able to measure what matters, and that starts to pick up the challenging the status quo around, okay, so therefore what type of capability do I need my frontline leaders to do, and how do we navigate this together, and how do I actually get the wisdom of my existing and old team that have been around for a long, long time, and the wisdom of the next generation who can come in and actually be permitted to then challenge the status quo and apply some of those things. And so you get the yin and the yang of what makes your team successful. Just
if I can, mate, sorry to interrupt, observation from both the Davids that I've drawn from the conversation thus far about sustainability and being able to almost in some ways, and coming from the sector that I do in commercial fishing, almost justify your existence, is understanding how we're going to deal with things like a social license to operate. Now that has different connotations in different industries, but one thing I've struggled to get feedback on in lots of different forums is how do we measure, again, coming back to the measurement thing, how do you measure your social license? Do I have one social license? Do I have 10% social license? Like what is the number and how do you measure it? Because I think sometimes this is a cross-sectoral issue and leaders are going to have to come to grips to this, and some do it better than others. And I'm not going to make judgments as to whether you even should engage in it. That's not my call. But I think one of the questions that comes into my mind is who owns the social license, and why are we trying to bust a gut to reach that social license? And in the food production side of things, which I have some experience, and I know David does, that we are food producers, and so we are mission critical in keeping populations healthy and alive. And at what point is putting energy into justifying your existence come to an end? And getting on with the job of providing food continue. Now, it's a massive political as well as industry question. It may be a bit beyond what we're talking about here in leadership, but I think it's something that we've got to come to grips with, because I can fully understand that we want to be showing our credentials, but that has to be one element of a massive range of things that we need to do to keep the doors open and keep people employed and keep producing things that society needs. And being able to produce protein for the human population is an important endeavor, whichever business is doing it. So we have to be careful about what we're measuring and not to put too many eggs into one basket, which I think is a lesson of COVID, that if you're going to be agile, don't put all your energies into one area. Otherwise, it's going to come back to bite you.
Thinking about what is the right thing to be measured, I think we've really got to get a head around, which is looking outwards and looking forwards, is about what I measured now and what I've measured in the past may not be what I need to measure going forward. And you've got to start say, well, what am I, you want, and I love the word, David, to reimagine. And I go back to what we did with Rakhil and his team, Project 24 and Project 8, about we had to really get the teams to think out of, we do it this way, we've always done that way, and give them a whole new perspective and reimagine them in that new environment. We're here now. What is the right things to be doing? And we do it now. We've got to start getting our heads around social responsibility. We've got to start thinking about people engagement culture. What's the right supply chains? What's onshored, offshored. And fundamentally, there will be some business saying, well, actually, I've learned what I'm doing now is not what I'm going to be doing in 10 years' time. So I don't know, Rakhil, whether PPE is going to be an ongoing product or market. But it'd be interesting where that sits now. But suddenly you've moved into something which, if someone had come to you 2 years ago, you would have said, Kev, no, don't be so silly. There's no way we'd even think about going down that direction.
Unfortunately, that doesn't have a happy ending. The market was flooded with PPE very shortly. So,
okay.
I don't know if you know, just as a fun fact, the price of a PPE outfit costs, $3.50 at its peak. It's now trading at like $1.08. Which is actually below manufacturing costs. So it's go figure. The whole topic, David, that you brought up about reimagining and what is right for now, and Kevin and Eric, you touched on it as well with what do you measure? I think the KPIs of yesterday, a lot of them are fading away and new KPIs are evolving, but we need to limit exactly how many points of measure, because you still need people behind them to look at them, to analyze them, and to understand what you're going to do with those figures. And I think that's a big realization for us, that a lot of the KPIs we looked at were actually irrelevant in this new world when time was limited.
That's a really interesting point, and that may be one that will come out as another topic here. But I think again, it's just learning. It's just this. I suppose we're coming back to this alignment point again, is about really aligning now. So what is the right things for us and our businesses and our people and our community? I know David and I know Rakhil and the team, you've got a real strong community link here. And I think the multiplier effect that's coming out of a lot of discussions now about people really understanding the impact of us needing them and them needing us. So, you needed good businesses being profitable to be able to spend into the community, which is great, but you need the community being there to help support the businesses as well. So there's a bit of alignment now that says we've got to really think about how that works now. And like you say, what are those key things? Because, one of the downsides of technology, it can give you 20,000 data points at a blink. Technology is great. We've got to watch out for it's not giving this data overload again, and we try and do too much. So I really love this thinking about, as we're navigating through this uncertainty, we've really got to get a head around what are the right things we need to concentrate on. And it may not be traditional balanced scorecard. It may be a flexible card that needs to change.
Heresy.
Or it's something that's got to come in and get out. We've got to move, or there's some things that we've just got to put on the board that we just never even thought about.
I think part of that's exactly right, and I really like what Rakhil and Eric was saying there. That one of the things in this transparent, measuring what matters world is actually ensuring that your standards meet expectations. So, what are the expectations of your consumers versus your staff versus the community, and that's the intangible piece. And this leads into this alignment, agility, and adaptability piece to say, well, whom are my target customers and target staff, and and target suppliers, and how do they value add to their standards, meeting sure that they meet your expectations, but also the expectations in terms of the stakeholders whom you need to serve and navigate. And as David highlighted, the sustainability agenda and expectations, that's gone. That race is now up and running. And therefore, how do you keep up with those expectations and manage that? And it is as much a political issue as is with a commercial issue. And so this is ignore that at your peril. So what are the other expectations that people are wanting in terms of being B Corp accredited, paying reasonable wages, adding value to the community? The things that go into that is something that the world is changing, and so therefore this agenda is placing profit before community is not sustainable in the short term in terms of the way what we've just come through.
What advice would you give, given your experience with the many different leaders that you've met with, about setting reasonable boundaries to that thinking? Because, and I'll use an example, I won't use the seafood or poultry sector, but let's say another farming sector where there is a group in the community that would rather we never produced protein of any kind, and they have valid views in their mind about what food production is. And if we listen to their concerns of the many that are out there, we wouldn't produce food at all. So when setting your boundaries, whose expectations are you necessarily going to meet? And then how do you navigate the politics that come into it? Because I didn't think we were ever going to get here with these discussions, but I think the overlap of business practice and getting good leadership in industry is often impacted by political imperatives that aren't necessarily your own. And there are multiple stakeholder groups in which we deal with that have agendas that have nothing to do with your long-term viability. So how do you set a boundary to that keeps you sane as a leader, keeps you introspective, but also keeps you agile?
Yeah, really good question. Probably just change it just slightly. Rather than talking a boundary, I'd set a compass. And it goes back to what David was talking about, of having a clear set of values and a clear purpose and a clear mission to say, okay, so how do we navigate this ever-changing world in a manner that is in line with community expectations, business expectations, staff expectations? This is where standards meet expectations. And for me, as you go through, what I do with organisations, help get clarity around what is our compass, so we can actually manage this grey area as we start to go through this around saying, okay, how do you make informed decisions based on a set of criteria of who we are, what we stand for, and what's acceptable? Builds into this. And this goes back in, I'm sure David's banged on about this for years, is the standard you walk past is the standard you accept. And that's what's going to come and bite you. So coming in and putting together your compass and having that done with informed discussions with your team will help add clarity into that process. And so you're aligned in some of the building blocks of how you make decisions and how you balance the commercial requirements of the business along with the cultural requirements of the business with the community requirements of the community whom you serve. And if you're not discussing that with your team, it's going to end in tears. But if you are discussing with your teams, you've got half a chance at navigating and aligning and adapting those changing circumstances. And this is mission critical in terms of building your robust culture around how we navigate the two ends of the spectrum.
People, particularly in the red meat industry, you hear a lot of people just going ballistic about vegans and, fake meat being called meat at all and things like that. I think that's just get over it, People know what you're talking about. But in terms of I think every organisation has to almost think like a social enterprise these days, and I think that's a good thing really for everybody. I mean, we work we've been a very long time in the Redlands community up here in Queensland, and most of our farms and all that are out west in Southern Downs, and we think long and hard about how what's our purpose in that community. Sure, we provide employment and all that, but our employees love to see us supporting their community as well, interacting in their community. And so there's a payback on it, but I think there's also an obligation to take some of the lessons out of social enterprise. I mean, they're there for a purpose, a good purpose, and you can do that and make money at the same time. I think the people who struggle with it are the leaders who don't have a very high score on humility, really. The leaders who, the old style where, I know what to do and I'll give you the orders, they're the ones that are going to really suffer. You've got to trust the people that you employ. I mean, I shouldn't say this too loud because people outside, but, the place runs itself. I mean, I just hear about the exceptionally good stuff and the exceptionally poor stuff. But I'm very confident that there's no surprises from out in the field.
Great, thank you, Rakhil. And then we'll look to do a bit of a close up then. So Rakhil, you got your hand up.
Speaking about social enterprise, and your various industries, we're in the same boat here in apparel, where being a machine operator has a social stake, and obviously more so during COVID, where you have factories of 1,000, 2,000 people upwards. We had one of our competitors was linked unfairly to a super spreader event within a factory, and we had rigid processes, and it affected morale for the industry. And I think that's when you kind of realize that no matter what you do, no matter how good or how clean your operations are, it's the external perception to stakeholders that you also have, and it's what can you do in an authentic way to make sure that it doesn't happen to you. And I don't have an answer, because it could be something you say, something you do. But David, you just touched on it, right? You can't control everything at the top. And as long as you hear more good news than bad news, I think you're doing okay. And you need to be a little pragmatic at times.
No, exactly right. It's a great analogy, and having worked with Rakhil and Madhwar and the team as well, I've seen firsthand how having that real, and David with his Dawala team, having that real positive community engagement that is really right and humble, and it is received in the right way, has a massive impact through the community. And I'm sure you've both had, if rewards is the right word for it, you've seen the benefit of that in the last 12 to 18 months, because there's a real connection. And I love that. And I think David, it's come up in the chat as well, this ownership principle. I feel part of the business. I almost feel it's my business. Therefore, I do the right things is a fantastic place to be, because I think what it also then means, you will adapt. You will be more open when something comes your way that you're not quite expecting, because there's this bit of, you wouldn't have said that if it wasn't real. Therefore, but I know you're willing to accept me if I come back with some feedback or come up with a better idea. And that's where that information really flows through. So I think there's some great connection, like I said, this whole multiplier effect, which I think also goes back to the supply chain now. It's not just us. It's about, if we could get that whole thinking, agility and value add and ownership to a whole supply chain, there's going to be some winners and losers here, but overall, the overall position should be better, which is really what we're going to. I think they're going back to a new normal, better normal. It's not going to be the old normal. I think it's just no way now. Everything's gone on. So it's really about, and I love the whole, for me to close out, it's that real time to reimagine now. What have we really learned, and what can we really go to at that next level? So I'd like to do the same thing again. So like I say, thank you, Rakhil. Thank you, David, and obviously Eric. I'd just like a little bit of a takeaway from you. So just something that's really resonated with you, and something as we wrap up the podcast, you really want to share with the listeners as when we talk about navigating uncertainty. So I'm going to go David Greaves.
I think that what's front of mind for us is that, I don't want to be flippant about this, but for us, COVID is a distraction. I mean, we think the real game is sustainability and climate change. I mean, that's still firing away in the background, and, there's a lot of resistance against doing something about it still. But I think we'll come out of COVID, and hopefully we'll be more match ready for taking on that battle.
And I think that fitted in definitely with the chat we had about our fit for future, or future fit leaders, about what we're taking away from here now to really go and maximize the potential from here. Rakhil.
I just threw it in the chat as well. I think David Stewart described it so perfectly and beautifully about expectations between customers, staff, and community. And for me, it boils down to trust, and ensuring that as a manufacturer, we are trusted by all three stakeholders. And, COVID was the great reset for us, as I spoke about it in process. And if we've wasted it, I think that responsibility is on us.
Yeah, I love that phrase. And I think it's definitely coming out with a number of the more forward-thinking leaders here, an opportunity that we don't want to miss out on. without a doubt. David Stewart.
Look, I got two outtakes. The first one is what a great example of agility and adaptability Kevin and Rakhil have done in their dealing with their web hosting, being down and you being able to run to Starbucks and sit on the roof, Kevin, to do this. So I've been very appreciative of the first-class case study of agility and adaptability. But for me, I think what this discussion has done is, and the thing is give everyone's got an ability now to actually go through their own great reset, and how to actually then go through and refresh and reaffirm who we are and what we do, and have that discussion around our purpose, our mission, and who we seek to serve, and go have a renew and refresh of that, and do that, and then start to then reimagine around what is it we then need to go through as we move into an uncertain future, and what would that look through, and that reimagining will give you some scenarios, and that then if you've got some scenarios like sailing, you actually then prepare yourself for bumpy waters or great winds or tailwinds or things like that allows you to then jump on that opportunity as and when they emerge, and then navigate the risks as and when they emerge. And so that's the reimagine piece, and that then moves into then thinking about how I actually prepare tomorrow's leaders today, and start thinking about our next discussion and how we might go about doing that.
What a fantastic segue into our next podcast, Eric. Oh, well done, David. You've nearly got a job here, David, for doing that type of thing. So, Eric, I'm going to hand you over to close us off there. But for me, that was another fantastic discussion. So, Rakhil, David, thanks for your time here, and I really appreciate your insights as we continue over our podcast series. So, Eric, just some key takeaways for you as we close out.
Sure, thank you. For a long time, I've been thinking about the following, and I think it came up through most of this discussion, is how do you help upskill, re-look at the capability of dealing with uncertainty? I think if I had a trifecta of things that I've been looking at, the two that I've mentioned before is foresight and strategic thinking. I think dealing with uncertainty, there's a whole toolkit, and I think research gaps there that I'm going to be looking into the future, definitely. And I think this kind of discussion cements it in my mind that uncertainty is an underlier of all of these discussions that we're having, and to assume that all of us in different leadership capacities, whatever they are, have a handle on how to deal with that well or effectively, I think would be to assume too much. So I think it's worth. Sorry, I just saw the quote there, Mike Tyson, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. Well, okay, so yeah, I have to agree with that. I think for me, there's more discussion to be had here, and I'm not catastrophizing. I think, Kevin, you said it best. There are opportunities here to do things better, and I think having the discussion around how you navigate uncertainty is only going to be a winner in the current business environment. And if going forward we get an ability to deal with uncertainty, I think most of the problems we've got in business would not be a problem. So that would be my takeaway. Thanks again for joining us on the podcast. I'd like to thank David Stewart, David Greaves, and Rakhil Hirdaramani for joining us on the podcast today. Thanks again, and we'll catch you all on the next podcast.